Looking at our world from a theological perspective. This is the Theology Central Podcast, making theology central.
Good morning, everyone. It is Saturday, August the 24th, 2024. It is currently 9:56 a.m. Central Time, and I am coming to you live from the Theology Central studio located right here in Abilene, Texas. Now, I want you to imagine the following scenario. You wake up tomorrow. It's Sunday. You tell everyone, get ready, we're going to church. And everybody's like, yay, we love church. Okay, maybe this is a little bit, not true, but okay, we love church. And everybody gets ready and you're driving to church and everybody's like, yay, this was great. Maybe you stop somewhere to get breakfast on the way there. So everyone arrives at church. They're not hungry. They have been well fed. They're excited and everybody runs into church, right? Everybody goes somewhere. Maybe you have the Sunday school hour. Everybody's doing their thing. And then you all come together and there you are, sitting in pews, if your church actually has pews, sitting in pews, sitting in seats, sitting in stadium seating, whatever seating you have. You're all sitting there. There's mommy, there's daddy, there's little Johnny and little Susie. Okay, whatever the situation is, you're sitting there, whether you're an individual, whether you have a family, whatever the case may be, children, no children, doesn't matter. But you're sitting there. And the pastor says, all right, open up your Bibles to the book of Romans. And you're like, okay, yeah, we've been in this series in Romans. All right, this is great. I've been really learning a lot of good theology in the book of Romans. This has been really good. All right. And in his kind of introductory material, kind of the introduction to the study in Romans, the pastor, cites a supposed scientific fact about God and human DNA. He gives this scientific fact about God and human DNA. And as soon as you hear it, there's a part of you're kind of looking around and everybody else is like, amen, amen. And they seem like, wow, they think this is the greatest thing ever. And they're amazed. And you see some people writing it down. Ooh, God is in human DNA. And you're like, wait a minute. You just feel like something's not right. So you kind of look around and you're like, well, I got my phone here. So you kind of grab your phone and you start looking up this supposed scientific fact about God in your DNA. And you start looking and you're like, wait a minute. I think this information is bogus. I think this information is fraudulent. I think what the pastor just said is bogus, fraudulent information. This has been debunked. Now, at that moment, what do you feel? Do you feel like, well, the pastor just didn't look it up. It's no big deal. I mean, I know he's standing behind the pulpit. I know he just claimed that this is scientific fact, even though it's fraudulent. So what? Do you just kind of everyone can get something wrong and you're just kind of dismiss it? Or do you kind of say, well, wait a minute. If he didn't bother to fact check and to verify and to research this supposed scientific claim that he just cited as factual, if he did not check this out, then why should I trust anything else he says about the book of Romans? Does it cause the pastor to lose credibility in your sight? And what do you do if your kids are old enough to understand what he said? When you get in the car, do you say, all right, kids, look, the pastor at the beginning, he gave that supposed scientific fact. Well, kids, I'm sorry to tell you, the pastor was wrong. Well, how do you handle that? Do you call the pastor later and say, hey, this information was completely fraudulent? How do you handle it? How much impact does it have on you? Do you even care? Now, I'm going to argue, and I cannot prove this, but I think there's a large number of people in the church. They just don't care if the information is true or false. If it sounds good, they're happy with it. And if you point out that the information is fraudulent, they may even argue with you. We're seeing that a lot in culture. Nobody cares about truth. Nobody cares about facts. As long as information supposedly agrees with their ideology, facts no longer matter. Well, that may be true in the political realm. That may be true in the culture. It should never be true inside the church. The church should care about one thing, the pursuit of truth, whether we like it or not, whether we agree with it or disagree with it. We should be willing to have things challenged. Now, I bring all of this up because at 4:30 a.m., 4:30 a.m. this morning. I was like, well, we've been working in the book of Romans, and we're doing this, going through the entire book of Romans, looking at every therefore. We're going to go through the entire book of Romans looking at every therefore. And I said that one of the things I would do is I would be looking up random sermons on the Sermons 2.0 app and dealing with therefore, and I may review how they handle the therefores. Remember, there's about, 24, 28, I don't have the exact number in front of me, therefores in the book of Romans. I think it'll be a fun, an interesting way to kind of get us back in the book of Romans, since we did a verse by verse study of the book of Romans for years, and now, but we didn't finish it because we took our detour into law and gospel. But I'm like, okay, so let me find a sermon. So I found one, 4:30 in the morning. I hit play, and about 4 minutes and 30 seconds into the message, the pastor cites this supposed scientific discovery, this scientific fact. And as soon as he said the so-called scientific fact, I was still laying in bed. I reached over, grabbed my iPad, and immediately started researching. And lo and behold, it seems like that fact may not be as factual as cited. Now, most of the time, when I do any kind of review, I give the name of the pastor and the church because I want you to go listen to it. But in this particular case, I'm not going to give the name because the goal here is not to embarrass or humiliate or anything along those lines. What I intend to do here is say, hey, here is this claim that I heard at 4:30 in the morning. It's posted on the internet. It's on the Sermons 2.0 app. It can be heard by anyone. It's public, right? The numbers for it, if I look at the numbers for it, it has been listened to. Let's see if I can find it. It's been listened to 167 times. So it's been listened to 167 times. So, I mean, that's a pretty decent number on the app. So I'm like, okay, so this is public. This is out there. What I want to do is this, and listen, my goal here is not to contradict the pastor. My goal here is not to criticize the pastor. What I want to do is challenge the claim of supposed scientific fact and say, there's at least, I've got multiple sources debunking this. There's YouTube videos where the original claim was made by the original person, and underneath there, under the comments, it's being ripped into shreds as this is pseudoscience. This is just nonsense. And so what we're going to do is I want to go after the theory. I want to go after the concept. And the reason I want to go after the theory and the concept is because if you hear the theory and you hear the concept, you can reject it and you can hopefully lovingly correct it. The goal here is not so much about the pastor or the church. I don't want to do anything to them. What I want to do is correct the concept and the theory. Right? Now, I may email them and go, hey, did you know that this is all fraudulent, and provide all of my research? But I'm more concerned about the public who will hear it. The public. And the reason I'm not so, I used to be like email, but I've emailed pastors so many times for fraudulent information, things that are just not true in a sermon. And I've never had one respond in anything other than being belligerent, telling me to basically, it's none of my business. And they've never pulled the sermon down or apologized for the utter, complete fraudulent information. And I've heard some crazy conspiracy theories put forth by pastors that are completely debunked. It's just not true. So, maybe I'm jaded, but now, you know what? I can't worry about what other people do, but I can try to combat the wrong information. Now, what I'm going to do, here's what I'm going to do. We're going to review the audio so you can hear them put forth the theory. Then I'm going to put forth the counter argument. Now, you, the listener, it's up to you to do your own research. It's up to you to try to figure out. And then you can decide whether you agree or disagree with it. I think it's problematic. At the very least, or put it this way. Even if you wanted to buy into this scientific theory, right? Even if you want to say that this is scientific fact, you would have to, if you're even being remotely fair to your audience. Just so though all of you know, there are many who question this and claim to have debunked this. So I believe in the theory for these 4 reasons. Others say that this theory is not true for these 4 reasons. At the very best, if you're going to give the theory from the pulpit, you have to at least give the people the facts about how much this is challenged so that the people in the pew will not be tossed to and fro with every wind of doctrine. If they're sitting in church being told, scientific fact, God is in my DNA, and then they out there are claiming that, and then someone comes back and throws something in their face that they've never heard before, that tosses them to and fro. The church is to equip saints so they will not be tossed to and fro, not giving them information that's only going to lead them to being tossed to and fro. So at the very least, there should have been a clear discussion of wait a minute, not everyone claims this. Now, maybe he does. I will go a little beyond where he says it, because as soon as he starts giving the information, I stopped the audio. So for the benefit of the doubt, we will play past what I heard just to make sure he doesn't let everyone know that not everyone believes in this theory. I'm hoping that's what he does, but that should be the very minimum. But then you would have to ask yourself, if there's all this questioning this supposed theory, then why are you going to give it from the pulpit, especially when the goal here is the book of Romans? But you can draw your own conclusion. So I'm not going to give the name, I'm not going to give I'm not going to give the church or anything else. If you're looking up sermons on the therefores in Romans, you may come across this one. But if you come across it, that's between you and you. All right. I don't need to know. And, that's perfectly, fine. But I want to be fair here. And again, I'm going after the concept, because the concept is not just in this sermon. The concept is all over the internet, right? The concept is very well known on the internet, right? Because this theory emerged in around 2000, and then I think it was debunked around 2010, I believe. So, but we will play this out and see. But I want to be very fair, because people get mad at me. I've got a long history when I hear sermons or pastors or Christian ministries putting forth fraudulent information, misinformation, wrong information. I will come and say, that's just not true. And then the people get mad at me. It's like, well, why are you getting mad at me? I'm the one trying to help us get rid of conspiratorial thinking and wild speculations and just basically made up fairy tales. We need to be Christians. Again, the biblical concept for Christians is we put away lying. We speak the truth. We do not engage in gossip and slander and bearing false witness. We should be factual. We should be careful. We all make mistakes. I understand that. But I also know we live in 2024. You can fact check things in 5.2 seconds. You have access to all kinds of information, but there's a certain way of thinking that creeps into the minds of some Christians. And it's like, well, no, this is what I believe, and any information that calls into question what I believe is false news. It's fake news. And it's like, no, just because something disagrees with you doesn't make it fake news. It may mean that what you're holding to is fake, right? So, let's pursue this. Are you ready? That was a long introduction, but I just want to be because I know I'm going to get emails. How dare you call this into question? This is absolute factual. But I think it's fraudulent. Well, I think in some ways it's using God's name in vain almost, but you'll have to draw your own conclusion. Here we go. This is what I heard at 4:30 in the morning. And remember, this was chosen at random. I didn't go looking for this. I was simply looking for a sermon to give me information on the therefores and see how they were going to approach the first therefore in Romans chapter 1. That's what I was looking for. I was not looking for some scientific theory that I'd never heard before and then have to be at 4:30 in the morning researching it. But here we go. We never know what's going to happen on this podcast, right? We never know. But I guarantee listening to sermons will always lead us somewhere. So here we go. Imagine you're sitting in church tomorrow morning. And this is what you hear. How would it impact you? You may not even care. I obviously care a little bit more. We will see. Maybe you're right. Maybe I'm right. Who knows? Let's find out.
But for the moment, if you would take your Bibles and go with me to Romans chapter 1. Now, here's what's hilarious. I know you're going to think this is really funny. When I originally got started doing this, I thought, well, maybe, perhaps, possibly, with as many chapters as there is in Romans, 16 chapters in Romans, we'll take a chapter a week. Then I thought, well, Romans 1 is 32 verses. It's one of the longer ones in the entire book. So, maybe we'll get that one in 2 weeks. We should be able to finish it up in 3. That's today. All right. So we're going to wrap up and finish looking at Romans chapter 1.
Now, from my perspective, if you can make it through Romans chapter 1 in 3 weeks, I need to learn how you do that, because I could not make it through Romans chapter 1 in 3 months. Okay. I mean, in fact, I can probably look and see how long it took us to make it through Romans chapter 1. I think it took us almost 6 months. It was crazy because there's a lot going on there. But okay, he's making it through the entire chapter of Romans chapter 1 in 3 weeks. That means he's typically doing more of an overview. He's probably breaking it down into certain segments. Now, his outline, I think he does offer an outline here. I found a little bit weird because he kind of has the therefore in the part of a section instead of the beginning or the ending of a section. Wouldn't the therefore mark a division if you're doing an outline? So the outlining thing is a little interesting here, but I don't want to get sidetracked. We're waiting for the so-called scientific evidence about God in your DNA. That's what we're waiting for. Here we go.
And we said that Romans 1, the entire chapter, the main theme of it as a whole is the ungodliness and unrighteousness of men. It has a lot more to say about those two factors of mankind than pretty much anything else in the chapter, other than just the fact that it is the opening greeting and all to the entire letter written to the church there at Rome. But we said the key verses are verse 16 and 17. We dealt with those last week. For I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God unto salvation to everyone that believeth, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek. For therein is the righteousness of God revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, the just shall live by faith. I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, and the just shall live by faith. And so those two verses being the key is not necessarily what the whole chapter is about, though. We began to look, we've already dealt with basically 3 divisions within the chapter. Paul's greeting, verse 1 to 7. Paul's longing, verse 8 through verse number 17, which we got through that part as well. And then we began to look at God's wrath on unrighteousness, verse 18 down to the end of the chapter, verse number 32.
And my question was verse 24, therefore God also gave them up to uncleanliness. Now, shouldn't the therefore mark either the beginning or the ending of a section? That therefore that's a transition, it's a connecting, it's a turning, it's a transition, right? So that's interesting. How I look, I love outlines. I love outlines when it comes to Bible study. And I always sometimes I put my church, I used to put my church on the spot and say, okay, guys, come up with an outline. Here we go. And then they would start outlining and I would well, what about this? Or what about this? And what about that? Almost inevitably, I would disagree with their outlines. Sometimes they would disagree with mine. But I'm not saying there's always a right or a wrong. I'm not saying, you can outline things in many different ways. I just think when I see a therefore, that typically signifies a transition from one section to another section, right? It's transitioning. So if it's a transition, should that not mark maybe something in your outline? Just a theory you can determine. But we're waiting for the scientific evidence about God in our DNA. Here we go.
And we got through thus far the guilt of the ungodly, verse 18, first part of verse 18, and then also 19 and 20. Deals basically with the knowledge of God is in them and revealed to them. So God has revealed knowledge of himself and even within man. I can't go into all the details. I was watching something recently about the molecule, the DNA molecule, and I don't have all the information. I saved it on my phone. I was hoping to be able to put it together and put something on the screen tonight just to kind of back this up. I might still do it another Wednesday evening as a precursor to moving forward. But I will say this: there was a man that was reading some scientific information off, and he was talking about the DNA molecule and how that in every aspect of DNA, it has a layout. There's a pattern in DNA, and that DNA, the way he was talking and laying it out, that DNA's pattern is a pattern of numbers. When you look at when you add up the way it's laid out, and so it's a pattern of numbers. And when you look up those numbers, and it's a consistent, there's four numbers that are presented in that pattern, and then those four numbers just repeat and repeat and repeat and repeat and repeat, and that's what creates DNA. Every human being is made of that DNA. Everything has DNA to it when it comes to life. And so he talked about how those four numbers that are laid out, when you look in the Hebrew, the Hebrew alphabet and everything, and you can associate numbers with letters in the Hebrew alphabet. He said the interesting thing is in the human DNA, in DNA of all living things, that DNA pattern-wise brings out to being, this thing's going to start doing, I was waiting for it. It's been a while since I've had to change this microphone out. But that DNA is in its pattern. You look at the letters that it represents. It's Y, W, Y. Yeah, thank you. YHWH. Thank you. My brain skipped there. And if you look at YHWH in the Hebrew, that spells Yahweh. That is Jehovah. And he was laying out how even in human DNA, the pattern of human DNA describes the Creator himself, Jehovah God. And so when you think about that, the knowledge of God is in them and revealed to them. It's in you to begin with, and it's revealed to you if you look at actual science, not modern day style of science, but actual science, and you look up actual DNA, you'll find that it has been proven that in numerology and everything laying out, that Jehovah himself basically stamped his own name in the living DNA of all things. And how interesting that is. But the guy who spoke it out and did all, he is much more eloquent than I am with it, but I found it rather interesting, especially with dealing with chapter 1, and that thought that
there's the supposed claim. God has stamped his name on human DNA. And he said, this is actual science, not that false science out there. So he's stating this as scientific, dogmatic fact, and that anything that would question this is not true science. He doesn't even tell the people this is a theory that has been debunked by many or challenged. No. In fact, he almost shuts that down by saying, real science, not that other stuff. See, real science will tell you that DNA contains a pattern that corresponds to the Hebrew letter YHWH, which is the name of God, Yahweh, Jehovah, Yehovah. Remember how to actually pronounce it, because they didn't use all the letters of, the Jews didn't write all the letters of God. We could get into a whole discussion there, but that's the claim. Now, 4:30 in the morning, I immediately I opened my eyes and was like, whoa, wait a minute, stop. And we know he's not going to come back and go, well, not everyone believes that. He already shut it down. Any science that would say this is not true is not true science. True science will tell you that, hey, the structure of the DNA contains a pattern that corresponds to the Hebrew letters YHWH, which is the name of God in the Hebrew Bible. God has stamped his name upon DNA. And everybody, Now, I don't know how many people in the background there were saying amen. The volume is kind of low. But immediately when I heard this, I was like, no. So, are you ready to work through this? Now, again, I don't care about, at that point, I don't care about his sermon. I don't care about the name of that church. I don't care about any of that. It's not about them. It's about this theory. Because Christians will go and promote this theory and cite it and post it on social media. And then when someone calls them out for this fraudulent information, they'll be like, well, you believe in that false science. We have real science that understands the true structure of DNA. Well, let's look into this and see what we can find. All right. Well, so you've heard their theory. All right. So basically, again, they suggest that the structure of human DNA contains a pattern that corresponds to the Hebrew letters YHWH, which is the name of God in the Hebrew Bible. This idea is based on the concept of gematria, a form of Jewish numerology that assigns numerical values to the letters. So immediately when I hear this is not based off science. This is more based off Jewish numerology. He says it's science. No, this is Jewish numerology. It's not science. And that's called gematria. All right. So are you ready? Let's look into this. All right. That's the theory. All right. Do I need to state the theory again? The theory suggests that the structure of human DNA contains a pattern that corresponds to the Hebrew letters YHWH, which is the name of God in the Hebrew Bible. Yahweh, right? Jehovah. This idea is based on the concept of gematria, a form of Jewish numerology that assigns numerical values to letters. So let me make it very clear. The basis of this is Jewish numerology, not science. In fact, you're imposing symbolism and numerology upon scientific information. This is not the way you do this. This is questionable. This is not coming from the Bible. It's not even coming from Christianity. It's coming from Jewish numerology. All right. So, all right, but let's read here. All right. The very first thing I found was this. This theory has been debunked. That's the very first. It took 3 seconds, and immediately I found out that this has been debunked. I found the video of the individual who gave this theory, or at least the video featured him. I don't know if it was put out by him, but it was featured him. And immediately, even the comments on YouTube was like, this is junk. This is trash. This is not true. This is utter fraudulent, right? So immediately I was like, wait a minute. See, even if I was to state this from the pulpit, I'd be like, well, I heard this. I believe it. Here's my 4 reasons, but here are the reasons people give to say it's not true. Now, at that point, you would ask, why do you want to do that in your introduction to Romans chapter 1 or your conclusion of Romans chapter 1? I think at that time, you've distracted us from the word of God. And look, I didn't even get into his teaching on Romans because now look what I'm doing. Instead of focusing on, man, that was such a good sermon on Romans. What am I focusing on? I got to figure out whether this is true or fraudulent. All right. So are you ready? Okay, so the very first thing has been debunked. The claim that the DNA sequence, specifically the Cepheric bridges between the nucleotides, follows a pattern of 10, 5, 6, 5. So this claim is based, this is very important, that the DNA sequence, specifically the Cepheric bridges between the nucleotides, follows a pattern of 10, 5, 6, 5, which supposedly matches the numerical values of Y, H, W, H, and gematria. In reality, DNA is composed of 4 nucleotides, all right, held together by hydrogen bonds, not sulfur bridges. So already we already know that there's a problem here. This is based on the concept that that the DNA sequence, specifically the Cepheric bridges between the nucleotides, follows a pattern of 10, 5, 6, 5. But it's not Cepheric bridges. It's hydrogen bonds. So already we have a problem. Moreover, there is literally no scientific evidence supporting the existence of such a pattern in DNA. The theory was first proposed by Dr., and I'm not even going to attempt to say his first name, Rubinstein, but it lacks credible scientific backing and has been criticized for its inaccuracies. So we know the name of the individual who put forth the concept. Now, some claim that he claimed he published this in a specific journal. Others claim that they cannot find the supposed publication of this in any journal. So there is some back and forth on that. But just please note, this gets into the entire structure of DNA and how it works. Now, this is why pastors have to be very careful coming to the pulpit claiming this stuff, because unless you're an expert on this, now you have to rely on a lot of different sources. But there are clear sources going, wait a minute, this is all based on, again, the idea that sulfuric bridges between the nucleotides follows a pattern of 10, 5, 6, 5. But in reality, DNA is composed of 4 nucleotides. I have the list of those 4 here, but I'm not going to try to pronounce them because then I'm going to look foolish, all right? They're held together by hydrogen bonds, not sulfur bridges. So already, what this is based off begins to fall apart. There is no scientific evidence supporting the existence of a pattern in DNA. The theory that human DNA is structured with numbers representing the Hebrew letters YHWH was first proposed by Dr. Rubinstein in the early 2000s. This idea gained some attention, but was later debunked by scientists who clarified that DNA is composed of nucleotides held together by hydrogen bonds, not sulfur bridges, as the theory suggested. The debunking of this theory occurred over several years as more scientists and researchers examined the claims and found them to be scientifically inaccurate. By the mid-2010s, the theory had been widely discredited. So this message that we're listening to was preached in 2023. By 2010s, it was already disproven. So why is it being brought back to the pulpit in 2023, being now broadcast on the internet in 2024? Like, why? That drives me crazy. Again, I'm not saying the pastor can't put forth the theory, right? Because I believe, say whatever you want to say, but just be hey, look, here's the individual who came up with this idea. However, starting in the 2010s, there was a wide criticism of this. Now, here are my 4 reasons for believing this is true, and here's their 4 reasons, or there's 2 reasons or 3 reasons for claiming it's not true. Now, the only problem is to do that, well, you wouldn't be doing it in your introduction or your conclusion to Romans chapter 1. What you should have done is just made this as your own individual sermon, and then give both views and then let the people decide. But even if if there's that much question to it, and it's based off Jewish numerology, okay, whatever. But I needed more. I needed more of an explanation. So I did a little bit more work. Found this. This theory, the theory that you just heard, suggests that the structure of human DNA contains a pattern corresponding to the Hebrew letters YHWH, which is the name of God in the Hebrew Bible. This source says, while it is a fascinating claim that has garnered attention among certain groups, however, it is important to critically analyze this theory to assess its validity from a scientific, linguistic, and theological perspectives. So this is going to go in far more detail, all right? So we're going to assess the validity of this theory along 3 lines: scientific perspective, linguistic perspective, and a theological perspective. Let's start with the scientific. DNA structure. Human DNA is composed of a double helix structure made up of nucleotides. These nucleotides are made of a group, they've made of a couple of, a sugar group, and one of the 4 nitrogenous based, and then they name all of this. So they go through how these nucleotides are made up. All right. Okay. And I'm not going to get into all of this. It's a phosphate group, a sugar group, and then it names the 4 nitrogen bases. So they're going to go through all of this. This sequence of these bases forms the genetic instruction for the development, functioning, and reproduction of living organisms. All right. Now, I could try to read all of that information, but it's a lot of very, detailed or technical information that I'm just going to be honest with you. I would not have a firm grasp on it. But so they're going into the basic structure of it, right? Now, at that point, that doesn't really prove or disprove the theory. They're just kind of making sure we understand the basic, how it is basically structured. But here's the key. There is no literal alphabet in DNA. DNA does not inherently contain letters or symbols from any human alphabet, including Hebrew. The suggestion that DNA corresponds to Hebrew letters requires the imposition of an external symbolic system on the biological structure. In other words, any perceived pattern is not intrinsic to the DNA itself, but is an interpretation imposed by those looking for specific patterns. So already we know this, the whole concept is falling apart. Let me read this again. DNA does not inherently contain letters or symbols from any human alphabet, including Hebrew. The suggestion that DNA corresponds to Hebrew letters requires the imposition of an external symbolic system onto the biological structure. In other words, any perceived pattern is not intrinsic to DNA itself, but is an interpretation imposed by those looking for specific patterns. So already we know the thing is beginning to fall apart. We already can tell. Pattern recognition. Humans are naturally inclined to find patterns and meaning. This is a psychological phenomenon. Now, I could give you the name of the psychological phenomenon, but I want to stay focused here, right? So this could explain why some might see a connection between DNA sequences and the letters YHWH. However, the connection is subjective and lacks a basis in molecular biology. This is not coming from molecular biology. This is something you're imposing upon it. You want to see a pattern, you can find a pattern, but you're imposing the pattern from an external source onto something that does not inherently have said pattern. In other words, you're imposing an idea upon something. You're forcing your idea upon something. And you're bringing in the name of God to do this. That's where I have a problem. Now we're utilizing the name of God in a way that maybe, in fact, almost taking it in vain. So there's the scientific perspective. DNA does not inherently contain a letter or symbol or any human alphabet, including Hebrew. The suggestion that DNA corresponds to Hebrew letters requires the imposition of an external symbolic system on the biological structure. In other words, any perceived pattern is not intrinsic. This pattern recognition is because we want to see it. We're imposing it upon this. And this is a psychological phenomenon that people will do. All right. And we could go study that psychological phenomenon, but we'll get further away from what we're looking. We're looking at just the basis for this theory. Now, that's the more scientific perspective, maybe an oversimplification of the scientific perspective. I mean, we could go find people who have greater knowledge of molecular biology and a greater understanding of DNA. But in many cases, what we're going to find is, again, this is an imposition of things upon it. Let's look at it from a linguistic perspective. Hebrew alphabet and numerology. The Hebrew alphabet consists of 22 letters, and some people engage in gematria, a form of numerology that assigns numerical values to these letters. Right? The idea that DNA sequences could correspond to Hebrew letters or numerological values involves translating biological data into a completely unrelated symbolic system, which is arbitrary and subjective. So even if you want to try to bring over numerology into this, you're translating biological data into a completely unrelated symbolic system. Now, this is the key, which is arbitrary and subjective. The whole thing is subjective. It's arbitrary. You're just assigning what you want to assign based off the pattern you want to find. Don't you see this entire thing is questionable from the outright. Its basis on science is, again, It's not a sefer. It's not. Well, we could go to the actual structure if I go all the way back. Remember, it's based on a Sephiric bridge when in reality it's not a Sephiric bridge. Okay, remember we already looked at that. Okay, it's hydrogen bonds, not a Sephiric bridge. So already it's based off a wrong understanding of science. You're imposing things that are not there. But even if you want to go from this, you have the issue that when you are basically translating biological data into a completely unrelated symbolic system, which is arbitrary and subjective. Even if one were to assign Hebrew letters to nucleotide sequences, right? Like A equals Aleph, right, whatever. The process would involve a significant amount of selection bias. Moreover, different people might choose different mappings, leading to different interpretations of DNA sequences. There is no standard or agreed upon method to map DNA sequences to the Hebrew alphabet, rendering any such claim speculative at best. This is arbitrary. This is speculative. This is not science. It's based off what you want to see. It's subjective. It's not scientifically factual, and it has no basis in being preached from the pulpit. But now let's look at it from a theological perspective. Symbolic interpretations. The name Yahweh, or Jehovah, is of profound importance in Jewish and Christian traditions, representing, obviously, the holy name of God. Some proponents of this theory might argue that a connection between Yahweh or Jehovah and DNA symbolizes divine creation. However, from a theological standpoint, such a claim should be approached with caution as it risks reducing the transcendental nature of God's name to a mere scientific curiosity. Well, I think it's more than just reducing it to a mere scientific curiosity. I think you're taking the name of God and placing it and claiming it somewhere where it may not even actually be, and you're utilizing God's name in a fraudulent and vain way. You're using God's name to make a fraudulent claim. That is not right. Associating DNA with YHWH or Yahweh could lead to misunderstandings about both science and theology. Theologically, it could suggest a form of biological determinism where the divine name is physically encoded in human beings, which might not align with more nuanced theological interpretations of God's relationship with creation. Okay, well, we could get into all of that. Now, here's the key. This theory lacks a solid foundation in molecular biology. DNA is not a code that can be straightforwardly translated into human language or symbols. The supposed connection between DNA and the Hebrew name of God is more of a product of imagination and pattern recognition than of empirical science. While the idea might appeal to those seeking to find a tangible connection between spirituality and biology, it is crucial to distinguish between metaphorical or symbolic interpretations and scientific facts. The claim does not withstand scrutiny from a rigorous scientific or linguistic perspective. In summary, while the idea of finding Yahweh in human DNA may be intriguing, it remains speculative and unsubstantiated by evidence. As with many theories that attempt to bridge the gap between science and religion, it should be approached critically with an understanding of the different domains of knowledge involved. It falls apart scientifically, it falls apart linguistically, falls apart theologically. It's based on Jewish numerology. It's arbitrary. It's subjective. You can assign this means this. The whole thing is problematic. Yet, this theory finds itself in the introduction of a sermon on the book of Romans. Now, I'm going to back this up, and we're going to let him give the theory one more time so that you can hear his perspective one more time. Here we go.
Molecule, the DNA molecule 7, Paul's longing, verse 8 through verse number 17, which we got through that part as well. And then we began to look at God's wrath on unrighteousness, verse 18 down to the end of the chapter, verse number 32. And we got through thus far the guilt of the ungodly, verse 18, first part of verse 18, and then also 19 and 20. Deals basically with the knowledge of God is in them and revealed to them. So God has revealed knowledge of himself, and even within man. I can't go into all the details. I was watching something recently about the molecule, the DNA molecule, and I don't have all the information. I saved it on my phone. I was hoping to be able to put it together and put something on the screen tonight just to kind of back this up. I might still do it another Wednesday evening as a precursor to moving forward. But I will say this: there was a man that was reading some scientific information off, and he was talking about the DNA molecule and how that in every aspect of DNA, it has a layout. There's a pattern in DNA. And that DNA, the way he was talking and laying it out, that DNA's pattern is a pattern of numbers. When you look at when you add up the way it's laid out, and so it's a pattern of numbers. And when you look up those numbers, and it's a consistent, there's four numbers that are presented in that pattern, and then those four numbers just repeat and repeat and repeat and repeat and repeat, and that's what creates DNA. Every human being is made of that DNA. Everything has DNA to it when it comes to life. And so he talked about how those four numbers that are laid out, when you look in the Hebrew, the Hebrew alphabet and everything, and you can associate numbers with letters in the Hebrew alphabet. He said the interesting thing is in the human DNA, in DNA of all living things, that DNA pattern-wise brings out to being, this thing's going to start doing, I was waiting for it. It's been a while since I've had to change this microphone out. But that DNA is, in its pattern, you look at the letters that it represents, it's Y, W, thank you, YHWH. Thank you, my brain skipped there. And if you look at YHWH in the Hebrew, that spells Yahweh. That is Jehovah. And he was laying out how even in human DNA, the pattern of human DNA describes the Creator himself, Jehovah God. And so when you think about that, the knowledge of God is in them and revealed to them. It's in you to begin with, and it's revealed to you. If you look at actual science, not modern day style of science, but actual science, and you look up actual DNA, you'll find that it has been proven that in numerology and everything laying out that Jehovah himself based.
If you look at actual science, not modern day science. But then he says numerology. Numerology is not science. You're basing this entire theory. It's not scientific. It's not biblical. This is complete wild speculation being spoken of as fact from the pulpit. This is where sometimes I'm like, I don't belong in Christianity. What is this? This cannot happen. We've got to combat this kind of thing. All right, I'll let him just finish this up.
Basically stamped his own name in the living DNA of all things. And how interesting that is. But the guy who spoke it out and did all, he is much more eloquent than I am with it. But I found it rather interesting, especially with dealing with chapter 1, and that thought that the knowledge of God is in them and revealed to them, and that all are without excuse because of that very thing. Then we begin to look at the actions of the ungodly.
Then he just moves on, but he stated it as factual. And I was watching some guy who was looking up or reading some scientific facts. Well, did you go look at the scientific facts? Did you verify anything? Who was this guy? So let me again go back and just take out, he didn't get into He didn't get into the idea that this theory is based off the idea that DNA sequence, specifically the Sephiric bridges between the nucleotides, follows a pattern of 10, 5, 6, 5, which supposedly matches the numerical values for God in gematria or Yahweh. But remember, in reality, DNA is composed of 4 nucleotides held together by hydrogen bonds, not sulfur bridges. So already the actual scientific concept behind it is fraudulent and wrong. But remember, human DNA DNA does not inherently contain letters or symbols from any human alphabet, including Hebrew. The suggestion that DNA corresponds to Hebrew letters requires the imposition of an external symbolic system onto the theological structure. In other words, any perceived pattern is not intrinsic to the DNA itself, but is an interpretation imposed by those looking for a specific pattern. Humans are inclined to look for these patterns. It's a psychological phenomenon, but it has nothing to do with what you're imposing that pattern to. All right. This connection is subjective and it lacks a basis in molecular biology. The Hebrew alphabet consists of 22 letters. Some people engage in gematria, a form of numerology that assigns numerical values to those letters. The idea that DNA sequence could correspond to Hebrew letters or numerological values involves translating biological data into completely unrelated symbolic system, which is arbitrary and subjective. Even if you were to assign Hebrew letters to nucleotide sequences, the process would involve a significant amount of selection bias. Moreover, different people might choose different mappings, leading to a different interpretation of DNA sequences. There is no standard agreed upon method to map DNA sequences to the Hebrew alphabet. Rendering any such claim is speculative at best. All right? We could go further into it, and I could reread a lot of things, but this entire thing, it's been debunked, it's been challenged, it's been questioned, it's speculative, and even if I wanted to say the very least the pastor could do, hey, I heard this theory, here's the 4 reasons I believe in the theory, but here are 4 reasons people disagree with this theory. Now, what do you think? Now, again, most people sitting in the pew are like, it's true. God is stamped on our DNA. I don't care what the facts say. Because that Christians love to do that kind of thing without ever really considering the facts. Now, I know there are people who listen to this podcast who have much more training in medicine. I know I worked in the medical world for 22 years. Medicine, biology, that type of thing. And I'm going to definitely continue to try to seek out my contacts from people I knew who obviously would have much more training and understanding of DNA, molecular biology, those areas. Other people may have studied this in college to some level. And I'm more than willing to hear anyone out. So I'm going to continue to verify. Now, you know what I'll do if I come back and go, well, wait a minute, maybe there's more to this. I got no problem correcting it. What I want to do is say, hey, there's enough information out there that only took me 4:30 in the morning laying in bed. It only took me about 5 minutes to immediately start coming up with all this information that's calling it into question. It took literally no time at all. So before I stepped in the pulpit and said it, I would at least be willing to go, hey, guys, I saw this, but just know that not everyone believes this, but here, now you could even challenge whether you think that's right or wrong, but I will continue to try to, do research and talk to people I knew from the past and who have far higher degrees in this area. My degrees are in theology and religious education and biblical studies, not molecular biology. Okay, by no means. Okay, so and my degrees in the healthcare world and the medical world is more in medical administration and coding and that type of thing than it is in than actual the structure of DNA. So you can those who have a greater knowledge, by all means, you can say whether right or wrong. I'm willing to hear from those who have actual understanding in this area. But it sounds like there's plenty of very knowledgeable people going, hey, this theory started in 2000, 2001, somewhere around that time period. And by 2010, it was widely debunked, widely proven to be not accurate. Yet, showing up in pulpits, or in a pulpit, I should say. I bet you I could find lots of sermons that put forth this idea. I bet you I could. I bet you I could. In so-called Christian science, and which would be really problematic. All right. I think that's good. All right. I do apologize. Nucleotides, I think I got that right. Gematria, I think I got that right. Sulfuric, I think I got that right. Sulfuric, was it hydrogen? I think I got that all correct. If there's anything I messed up, I apologize, because obviously we want to be as accurate as possible. Let me see here. Hydrogen bonds, not sulfuric bridges. Okay, yeah. So I think we got that right. I didn't give the name of the psychological phenomenon for people finding patterns. I think the only area where I made a on the moment spot change is when I got into the human DNA is composed of a double helix structure of nucleotides. These nucleotides are made up of phosphate. This is where I kind of stopped and decided not to go into all the structure. Phosphate group, a sugar group. Then it names the 4 nitrogenous bases, if I'm saying that right. And then I didn't name all of them. The sequence of these bases forms the genetic instruction for the development, functioning, and reproduction of living organisms. So that was kind of just giving you the basis of human DNA. All right. But there's a lot of things there that are like, okay, not nitrogenous, I think is how you say that. So I think I got most of that correct. That paragraph, I probably should have just left that one out because it wasn't really necessarily important to the overall discussion. But I just wanted to, show, hey, there's actual structure how this is put together, and none of this has anything to do with Jewish numerology. Okay, none of this, all right? You're imposing something on biological data. You're imposing Jewish numerology, and you're doing it in an arbitrary way, subjective way. And interesting that the individual, my understanding, who did this was Jewish, trying to find, in a sense, the Old Testament name of God in the pattern. Wouldn't he be imposing it? Right? Wouldn't he have a predisposition to see it? It would be like, a Christian finding the name of Jesus, or it'd be one thing but no, this is not like everyone can look at the data and go, because you're taking Jewish numerology and imposing it. It's not coming from the DNA. You're putting something upon the DNA. That's not molecular biology. That's not scientific. That's whatever fields that this would fit into, whichever fields of study, whichever academic areas that this would fit into. I don't want molecular biology seems to be the major field, but there may be other adjoining fields of study that this could connect to. Anything that would look at human DNA. But this is not coming from molecular biology. What you're claiming is you found something in Jewish numerology that was then imposed upon biological data, and making a claim about God's name being somewhere where God's name is not there based off what you're claiming, and therefore you're using God's name in vain. That becomes a theological issue and possibly even a sin issue. All right. You can tell me what you think. All right. I'm going to continue to see what I can find out about this and try to see. I know there's a lot of people who listen to the podcast who have far more advanced degrees in areas that would be more related to this than I do. All right. So you can cite your credentials, all right? Cite your credentials, cite your area of study, cite the university which you attended. Please give information. Like if you're going to give me information, please cite the correct, information. Like, hey, I attended this university and I have a degree in molecular biology. Okay, great. Now, and you can say, you're absolutely wrong. Okay, that guy is absolutely right. Okay, all right. All right, that's good. Now, why is it that all the information I can find disagrees with you? All right. So, and because that's the kind of back and forth. What I wanted you to do is hear two completely contradictory theories. His theory that was promoted, and all the information that seems to the theory. I'll call my side a theory that contradicts the other theory.
Sorry, I can't tell what speaker you are referring to.
All right. And you see my iPad is trying to talk to me. All right, there we go. All right. Yeah. See, she doesn't even understand. All right. But we'll just see. We'll just see where it goes. All right. Hopefully it doesn't go anywhere. Hopefully people will just go, look, here's the thing. At the very least, I'll end with this. At the very least, minimum, before you go out spouting or citing the supposed theory that God is written into our DNA, maybe you should at least pause and go, do I want to put forth an idea that is so rejected, criticized, and claimed to be debunked? Because if I put forth this idea, I'm not going to be leading people to a discussion about God or his word or his gospel. What I'm going to be doing is now leading people into a never-ending debate over whether this information is true or false, which then takes away from Romans. This is a sermon on Romans. I never got to Romans. I got to this so-called supposed scientific fact. And now I've spent an hour talking about that, not talking about Romans. That's why, as pastors, we always have to be careful what is said from the pulpit. I have made similar mistakes. I am by no means saying I've always done everything correct. I've obviously made a million mistakes. What I'm saying is whenever we throw something out like that, if all it's going to do is take away from the book of Romans, then what is our ultimate goal there? Unless you're convinced that this proves Romans chapter 1, which he almost seemed to imply that this proves Romans chapter 1. But does Romans chapter 1 need Jewish numerology imposed upon DNA, upon human DNA to prove Romans chapter 1? That's a strange apologetic. All right. Thanks for listening. Everyone have a great day. I'll continue to look up and email past people I work with and say, hey, Doc, you had like 15 degrees. We worked together for like 15 years. Help me out here. Here's this theory about human DNA. I will go with the doctor I worked with who was an atheist. I'll go with the doctor I worked with who was a Christian. That will be, if I can contact both of them, that would be interesting. Here's the atheistic doctor. Here's the Christian doctor. What do they say? I don't know if I can contact them. I don't even know where they are anymore. But if I can find them, that would be interesting. All right. Thanks for listening. Everyone have a great day. God bless.